Hi, today you're with Community Health Resource Center. This is our first heart health video log with Community Health Resource Center's registered dietitians, Elena and Sabine Haken. Today is April 20th, and we will be talking about a low-salt diet. Elena, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Elena Zidaru, and I've been working for Community Health Resource Center for the past 8 years, and part of my job is actually to meet with patients one-on-one for nutrition counseling. And what I enjoy the most when I'm talking with patients is just like you could really hear their story and understand their eating patterns and their lifestyle, and you're able to just we can individualize that diet to help them achieve their health-related goals. Some of my specialties include, I work a lot with people for weight loss or weight management, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol, diabetes, lots of also patients with gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome, it's very common, or acid reflux, but also some inflammatory bowel diseases. I also work a lot with cancer patients going through chemotherapy, radiation, so kind of prior, during treatment, or after treatment. And also I do also some work with an adult cystic fibrosis clinic, just kind of helping patients to keep nutrition status up and gain weight. So that includes some of my specialties, and I really enjoy, as I said, helping people one-on-one to achieve their health-related goals, no matter where they are.
Thank you, Elena. Sabine, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hi, my name is Sabine Hake. I've been working for the Community Health Resource Center for, I think, 10 years. And I work in individual sessions as well as group and family sessions. My specialty training really comes out of the world of eating disorders, disordered eating. So I have a deep background in helping people make changes, making changes against resistance, and helping them achieve their health goals against any kind of difficulties, really. And the biggest pleasure I probably get out of my work is to see when clients really turn that corner and figure out why they cannot make a particular change, and then actually sort out what it is that they need to do in order to make that change, and then actually make it. So while that is my specialty, I also in my faculty with the Community Health Resource Center work in many different departments. So in the cancer department, as well as in the heart health department or cardiac rehab department, to help clients achieve their health goals and support them in their changes.
Thank you, Sabine. So we are going to get started with some common questions related to sodium consumption and with relation to cardiac health. The first question is, what relation does salt consumption have with blood pressure and subsequently heart health? Sabine, why don't you go first, and then if Elena has anything to add, she'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. So sodium or salt is available in almost all products, all food products. All foods have a particular level of sodium or salt. But when you eat too much of that electrolyte, then the body tries to keep its homeostasis or its equilibrium of its own sodium content. And it does so by bringing on usually additional water or holding onto water in certain parts of the body. And that usually means that the body starts swelling, either extremities start swelling, or the blood volume just plainly goes up. And that causes an increase in blood pressure. It doesn't happen like this for everybody. But for those people where it does happen, it is really important that they actually watch what kind of salt or how much salt and sodium they consume.
Thank you. Elena, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's as Sabina said, this mechanism of increasing blood volume definitely can contribute to an increase in blood pressure. There's also another effect that sodium can have on the lining of your blood vessels. They can actually make the sodium, too much sodium over time can actually make your blood vessels stiffer. So they're not as flexible anymore. And that happens naturally with age too. But sodium, as I say, can actually speed up this process. And that can actually increase your blood pressure, because stiffer arteries, when the blood is pumped from your heart into something that's stiff, well, just think about pressure in a hose. You know, your hose has rigid walls, and that actually creates the pressure at the end of your hose. If the hose would be flexible, there's not going to be any pressure. So when you have stiffer arteries, that will build up pressure in your blood when the blood is pumped out of your heart, and that can obviously contribute to the blood pressure too.
Thank you. Thank you. Our second question is, how much salt is too much? And is there an intuitive way of keeping track of like the right amount? Like, what if a person doesn't really know what 1,000 milligrams look like or feel like?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's a good question. We talk about milligrams and grams, and a lot of people do not really know how much that is. And it's kind of hard to even day by day to be able to calculate and keep track of everything. So even though we have a recommendation for a lower sodium diet to try to keep your budget under 2,000 milligrams a day, especially if you have high blood pressure already or you're on a medication or not, regardless, if you have high blood pressure, it should be under, we estimate somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium. Even for general population, healthy population, we say 2,300 milligrams of sodium would be a good amount. We're not being too much, so then we don't increase the chances to have high blood pressure. So this is a budget that we have, and then again, how much is that? That's, I think, the problem that most people struggle with. If you cook the way we think and we recommend, if you cook mainly at home and cook from scratch most of the time, and you just add salt as part of your herb and condiments and spices, and you add some salt too, it's not going to be too much. Likely it's not going to be too much, and you're not going to go over that budget in a day when you eat mainly whole foods or foods prepared at home from Whole Foods. Obviously, herb and spices and condiments or garlic and things that you cook with that will bring more flavor will help to not have to add that much sodium. Most of the sodium in our diet comes from processed foods and restaurant eating, not from the salt shaker actually. So again, even if you add some salt in your cooking, the likelihood for that to be too much is not as high. So that would be one way to look at it. Maybe I should eat more whole foods, less packaged foods. When you use maybe in cooking some packaged foods like canned goods or tomato sauce or things like a chicken broth, then you will be able to look at that nutrition label, and that's the way to kind of figure out if this will add too much sodium to your cooked meal or not. So what we say, if you keep your sodium per serving around 200 milligrams or less, and you buy products that are listed like that, the likelihood again to exceed that budget, it's not that high. So 200 milligrams of sodium or less per serving is what we say to look for things like canned beans or canned goods or canned vegetables or tomato sauce or chicken broth or anything that's packaged. And nowadays there are more and more products with no salt added or low sodium that you'll be able to find that.
Thank you. No, go ahead, Sabine.
So a big piece in the discussion about, well, how much is too much or what is too much, is really to watch out for overloading a meal or your system at any given time. So let's say the general recommendation is 1800 or 2000 milligrams of sodium, which, by the way, translates to roughly a teaspoon of salt. But let's say that that's your recommendation, that's the recommendation that you're going to follow, then the key is not to have all of that in one meal, because that's exactly the place then where the system, your body goes, wait a minute, what am I going to do with all of that? And starts really trying to dilute the blood and add more fluids to the system and start swelling up. But if you spread it out and follow those guidelines that Elena was mentioning, like limit the amount of salt that you get from things like salt, and eat lots of fresh foods. They all contain a little bit of salt, but they're not loaded up with salt. Then you will not have 1,000 milligrams or 1,500 milligrams of sodium in a dish. However, with the food label, you can see that certain foods really naturally tend to be really, really high in salt. So a slice of bread might have 200 milligrams of sodium, but a cup of commercially produced soup can get you up to 700 and 800 and 900 milligrams of salt. So anyway, that's where you have to be really careful and follow those guidelines of, like, if you add anything that has salt added already by somebody else, then stick to what was Elena was pointing out, to the 200 milligrams a serving.
Is this about 200 milligrams?
No, that looks like a tablespoon to me.
Yeah, it is.
A tablespoon? So a tablespoon is 3 teaspoons.
Oh.
So 3 teaspoons of salt, you could be up to 6,000 milligrams of sodium.
That's good perspective. Thank you.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, and also what to mention, people get confused, sodium and salt are not equal.
Yeah,
so sodium, table salt is sodium chloride. So it's, I think, 40% sodium and 60% chloride or something like that. Let's say 50-50. So when you, in a teaspoon of salt, you're not, of table salt, you're not having 100% sodium.
Correct.
So you're not having, for example, a teaspoon of salt is actually about 4 grams. That would be 4,000 milligrams, but it's about half of it. So it's about 2,000 milligrams, what Sabina said that a budget in a day would be for sodium.
Thank you. That's right.
We just lost it. Just like,
no. That's so helpful. That's really, that puts it into perspective, definitely, because I mean, just like the average person, I just eyeball the salt that I put in or use packaged foods, and so I don't really know actually how much I'm controlling for when I'm eating salt or consuming sodium. All right,
thank you. And
go ahead.
In a dish that you cook or in a pot of food, you might get 4 or 6 servings. You might put a teaspoon of salt, but then you split it by, let's say, 4 servings that you make something. It rarely happens that we cook one portion only and we put a teaspoon of salt in that. I'm not saying that it's impossible to do that, but I'm just saying usually when we cook, we get more than one portion out.
Yeah, there's one thing I like to add too, is like our taste buds obviously respond to salt, but they respond to how much we use. So the more we use salt, the more the taste buds actually adjust to that. In other words, the more we use it, the more we want it. So if you get away from that and you go like, okay, I'm not going to use that much salt, or I'm going to start eating my broccoli fresh and not out of a can, or, that type of thing, then gradually your taste buds will actually change down to whatever that level of new salt is. And that is really important to know. It takes about 2 weeks for taste buds to change over. So if you're making a change and you all of a sudden notice that certain foods taste way more salty or way less salty, then that's because you have made a change already and your body is actually responding to it as well.
Thank you. Okay, our next question, I think it'd be fun if this would be like a lightning round, but if you could just throw out some of these foods, what are some surprisingly high sodium foods?
Well, I guess Sabina said canned soups or
Yeah.
Like chicken noodle soup.
Yeah, unfortunately, chicken noodle soup, lots of the salts, lots of, you cannot, let me just back up. You can't make soup without salt. You're going to need some salt. The question is how much. And in most cases, when they come commercially made, they're pretty loaded with salt because they don't exactly use a lot of spices to add flavor to the soup.
Yeah, so canned
ramen
soup.
noodles.
Ramen noodles.
Yes, of course, many of the snack foods,
Pretzels.
yeah, pretzels.
Chips.
What about frozen foods? Any surprising frozen foods that are high in sodium?
Well, a frozen cooked meal, like, just a frozen meal, like what we call TV dinners, right? Those in general are pretty high sodium. That means 500 plus. I mean, for the lowest I've seen so far for a fully cooked meal that you just stick in the microwave and heat it up and have it, it's probably around 300 milligrams per serving. So it's still kind of over that definition of 200 milligrams or less per serving, right? There would be low sodium, consider low sodium or so. But even in the 300 area, you're not going to find a lot of frozen meals. I think a lot of them are 450, 550 plus. So they're pretty high.
Yeah. A lot of the baked goods that are made with actually baking powder or baking soda, because those leaveners are actually salt based. So banana breads, pound cakes, those kind of things. Now they don't taste salty, they taste sweet, but actually when you have salt and sugar work together, they create interesting flavor palettes that we enjoy. But the commercial versions usually tend to have quite a bit of salt in them, and so you don't see that until you see actually the nutrition label and go like, wow, really, 200 milligrams for a slice of banana bread? Wait, where does that one come from? So.
And also breads, as Sabina mentioned, I mean, there are breads, the sliced breads available. There would be 200 to even 300 milligrams of sodium per slice. So if you have a sandwich just from the bread, you're gonna get about 600 milligrams of sodium. If you buy and you're not paying attention to the label, a bread that will have about 300 milligrams per slice. Deli meats, processed meats are high in sodium, and that will include anything from bacon, sausages, hot dogs, deli meats, prosciutto, salami. Those usually are cured and processed meats, and sodium, it's part not just of the flavor, but it's the preservative, is the kind of the way they make the processed meat lasting.
Yeah, and then spice mixtures. I mean, while some condiments might be obvious, teriyaki sauce or soy sauce have quite a bit of salt because they're basically a liquid salt. But so many of the spice mixtures have a substrate of salt run right through it. So it comes to barbecue sauces or, garlic salt, celery salt. If the name salt is in it, it's gonna have salt, So I think that sometimes we forget. I need to actually look at the combination of what's actually in here. My new favorite one is everything but the bagel spice from that you can buy now everywhere. It's so yummy and it has so many yummy things in it, but it also has a lot of salt in it, which is, which makes up some of the flavor.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. We have one more question, and Sabina actually already touched on this, so you guys can elaborate further if you feel it's suitable. But for people who have just been eating their normal diet for years now and then having to change how much salt they put in, and food now seems bland. You mentioned earlier it could take up to 2 weeks for your taste buds to adjust to how much salt now is in the food. But if you could talk more about that, I think that it would help people who are struggling to adjust their diet.
I mean, 2 weeks seems maybe like a long time, but and maybe it is to do one thing for 2 weeks, but I go make one change. So in case of sodium, let's say you always add sauces or salt to your plate before you even taste them. I would go like, maybe you change it around and you go like, all right, let's taste it first, and let's actually see what we taste and see if we like this taste, and see if we can do without the additional salt on the plate, and then see how your taste actually changes within 2 weeks. And once you're comfortable with that, then you do the next thing. Maybe there's something else that is quite the salt container in your house, and you take that one out. In other words, take it slow. It's okay to go slow, because that actually makes the change a little bit easier, and then you're successful because you made a small change, and you can say this to yourself that you did that, and that's success.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the success is very important, to the point that if you're a person that right now eats a lot of fast food, and even when they eat at home, they add salt without tasting it, just kind of, it's not realistic to think, let's just go for no salt added type of foods and just stick with spices and herbs. I think for someone like that, cutting back 50%, like getting a low sodium or even reduced sodium type of foods, as Sabina mentioned, trying not to add that extra salt, but still add salt when you cook your food, but not adding extra on your plate. Those would be kind of more intermediary steps, and not trying just because you want to try it. You want to make it more achievable and a more gradual change. Your taste buds over 2 weeks, you get new ones, and those will be trained with less sodium, and then it's going to be easier to push down even further and cut back even more of your sodium. And we've worked with a lot of people that came back and experienced this and say, I don't even know, now I just stopped by and I had the McDonald's or a fast food meal, and I couldn't even finish it. It's too salty. I can't even remember. I can even imagine how I used to eat this every day of my life. And it's so interesting, but we heard that so much, and it's the same with sugar. So it's happening. The taste buds really change. They're a very short life type of cells, and we change them every 2 weeks.
Wow, I didn't know that. But thank you. That was the last question, and I just like to conclude by saying CHRC really hopes that you enjoyed this panel with our fantastic registered dietitians, Sabina and Elena. And while the information here is meant to be educational, we want to iterate that every person is different, and what may be acceptable, or what may be an amount of salt that's acceptable for a person to consume, is completely different for another person. And registered dietitians work with you to understand your lab results. They provide nutritional guidance that takes into consideration your medical history and eating habits. So if you're interested in working with one of our registered dietitians, we're accepting new patients. Community Health Resource Center. In compliance with physical distancing, our appointments are carried out via phone appointments, virtual conferencing, or FaceTime. And you can contact us at the email address or phone number in the description of this video. And it's a very quick process, and you'll be connected with the registered dietitian that you are most interested in, or we'll connect you with one. Elena and Sabina, is there anything else that you two would like to add before we sign off?
Stay healthy.
Be safe, and we'll see you in our next session.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.